Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, 5 things we've learned from a very entertaining first week of the Tour de France. We'll also take a brief look ahead to some other racing that's coming up over the next week and round up all the other racing related news too. So after 9 days of racing around the south of France, this is the way things stand. Roglic at the head of affairs and in the yellow jersey. Egan Bernal, last year's winner, now in second place at 21 seconds, with Guillaume Martin in third. And the top 10 are separated by a minute 42, setting us up very nicely for an extremely exciting second week of the race. The opening act of the race, though, has already been thrilling. A bit of everything thrown in: climbing, crosswinds, sprints, and unfortunately a number of crashes too. 2 of those sprints were won by Wout van Aert of Jumbo-Visma, and so the first thing we've learned from that opening week is that he is now officially the best male cyclist in the world. No, he won't win the race overall obviously, and he's unlikely to ever transform himself into a GC threat for a 3-week Grand Tour, but that doesn't matter. His versatility and strike rate since racing resumed has been nothing short of incredible. By the time he'd taken his second stage win, out-sprinting Edvald Boasson Hagen from a small group that had been reduced in size due to the crosswinds, he'd had 16 days of racing since August the 1st and won 6 times. And they've been such different wins too, over the gravel of Strade Bianche, following an attack by Julian Alaphilippe at Milano Sanremo and out-sprinting him at the line, an uphill sprint win at the Criterium du Dauphiné, the Belgian National Time Trial Championships ahead of world hour record holder Victor Campenaerts, and then 2 sprint wins at the Tour de France. But it's what he's been doing when he hasn't been winning that's been equally impressive, dropping some of the best climbers in the world whilst riding at the service of his team leader Primož Roglic. And let's not forget, this man also competes in cyclocross and is a 3-time elite world champion in that discipline. It's just a pleasure to watch, quite frankly. He's great for Belgian cycling, he's great for cycling in general, and long may it continue. Speaking of his team, we've also learned that Jumbo-Visma are now the new Team Sky. They've really taken the race by the scruff of the neck from the very first day and ridden like champions in waiting. They've been setting the tempo on the climbs despite not having had the actual yellow jersey on their shoulders until yesterday. Now, whether or not it all pays off with the final yellow jersey in Paris remains to be seen, of course, but it's been great to see them playing Ineos at their very own game. Ineos Grenadiers, meanwhile, have been forced to completely change their game plan. We've also learnt that Tadej Pogačar is the most exciting GC prospect of the moment. Having lost over a minute in the crosswinds of stage 7, he came out fighting the following day to claw some of that time back, and then won yesterday's stage, moving himself back up to 7th in the GC. And I just love the way that guy rides. He's mentally incredibly strong. Most people would have been a bit down in the dumps after losing that time. But physically, he's even stronger. The power he produced up the Col de Peyresourde was just incredible. So looking at his Strava stats, he averaged 446 watts for the final 10 minutes and 41 seconds of that climb, which if he's 66 kilograms, puts that effort at 6.75 watts per kilo. Bonkers. No wonder the others couldn't, or at least didn't, go with him. And his overall time up that famous mountain was the quickest that's ever been recorded. And with the form he's in, he could win the Tour de France at his very first time of trying. There is a long way still to go, of course, and his team's not the strongest at the race, but I'd kind of like to see him put the cat amongst the pigeons when it comes to the really high mountains of the Alps in the last week. How good would that be to see? We've also been reminded that it's the riders who make the race, not the route. And this was particularly the case on stage 7. There, Bora Hansgrohe went on the offensive at the very start of the stage on a fairly innocuous 4th category climb. They went so hard that most of the sprinters were dropped. Then, not only did they continue to push the pace through to the intermediate sprint, which allowed Sagan to take the green jersey from Sam Bennett, but they also continued after it too. Add into the mix a healthy dose of crosswinds in the closing 40 kilometres, and what could have been a very calm day with a sprint finish turned into one of the most entertaining of the race so far. It came off the back, actually, of a stage which featured some serious climbing, but not much in the way of action, apart from Alexei Lutsenko, who comfortably took his first Tour de France stage win from the breakaway that day. Now, we also learnt that rules are rules, and that they apply to everybody. Julian Alaphilippe of Deceuninck Quick-Step was in the yellow jersey and had what was probably the most expensive drink of his life on the stage 5. So he took a bottle from a team soigneur, who happened to be his cousin, inside the last 20 kilometres of the stage, which is against the rules. For that, he was handed a 20-second fine, which meant that he lost the yellow jersey to Adam Yates. He'd had to quickly jump out of the shower and then head to the podium to collect it. Now there was, of course, much debate as to whether the penalty was justified or not, but in my opinion, of course it was. The rules are there for everyone, including the yellow jersey. Everybody knows those rules, and so you shouldn't be surprised to be penalised if you break them. Anyway, Alaphilippe has now dropped out of the general classification entirely, so we can expect to see him lighting things up over the next 2 weeks in an attempt to add to his win from stage 2. And finally, we learnt that Thibaut Pinot will never win the Tour de France. Harsh? Fair? I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments section down below, but it's just looking increasingly unlikely that Pinot will ever bag the big one. There's just always something that goes wrong for him, isn't there? Whether that's being caught out in crosswinds like last year, crashes, illness, cracking under pressure, or simply a confidence crisis when it comes to descending. The best riders in the world, the riders who win the Tour de France, don't seem to have weaknesses, and when they do have a bad day, they minimise their losses. Pinot's weaknesses have been exposed many times over at this point, and whilst I think that almost all of us would love to see him win the Tour de France one day, I just don't see it happening. His biggest GC win to date was the Criterium International back in 2016. 2 years before that, he'd finished 3rd overall at the Tour de France. That was at the age of just 24. He's now 30, but you get the sense that time is quickly running out for him. I'd love to get your thoughts on this one, actually. There is a link on the screen right now to a GCN poll. Do you think that he can win the Tour de France in his career? Yes or no? And you can also let us know your thoughts in the comments section below this video. These, incidentally, were the thoughts of Brad Wiggins on the breakaway post-stage on Saturday.
He's almost quite adolescent in his demeanour and everything like that. You know, he's they're all under the wing of Marc Madiot, who we see who's kind of this very much like a father figure, very kind of outspoken, very emotional himself, and as we said before, you know, from the management down, you know, if you've got an emotional manager like that who's kind of shows it on TV, when they're winning he's kind of the most excited, when they're losing he's kind of angry and this and the other, and all them riders are very much like his children. It's that sort of father-son relationship, and that doesn't always work in the modern day cycling. You know, you need a calm head at the top of the game, and that sort of encourages that adolescent feel amongst the riders, that they're not these big vocal leaders that feel like they can stand up and take charge and that. And I almost feel like he needs a change of team.
Don't forget, you can catch the breakaway after every single stage of the Tour de France in all our race pass territories. So make sure you tune into that if you haven't been doing so already. And thanks actually for all the positive feedback from those of you who have been watching it. Now, just before we finish with the Tour de France, a very quick word about Mark Hirschi of Team Sunweb. Had his heart broken on yesterday's stage after an epic, and yes I do feel like I use that word, an epic solo breakaway in the mountains. He got caught with 2 kilometres to go and then couldn't quite muster the strength to win the sprint to the line. But what a ride! I mean, the guy was attacking left, right and centre before the climbing had even started, and don't even get me started on his descending. Skills for days that man possesses. He is one hell of a bike rider, and there's no way he's going to get to the end of his career without winning one stage of the Tour. Thanks for the entertainment, Mark. That was something else on Sunday's stage. Now, believe it or not, the Tour de France is not the only bike race that is on right now. So today, Tirreno Adriatico starts. This year, it's an 8-day race, which means your Tour de France rest day withdrawal symptoms need not be so bad this year, because you'll be able to watch it live on our race pass. Territory restrictions, as ever, do apply, so check the calendar to see whether it's available where you are. If it is available where you are, it is definitely well worth tuning in. Jakob Fuglsang, Geraint Thomas and Vincenzo Nibali will all be using it as their key preparation for the Giro d'Italia, which actually is now less than 4 weeks away. Chris Froome is also competing there, whilst Fernando Gaviria and Pascal Ackermann will be amongst those lighting up the sprints. With Mathieu van der Poel of Alpecin Fenix on the start list too, we're sure to get some very entertaining stages over the next 8 days. Hot on the heels of the start of that, and starting actually on the 11th of September, is the biggest women's stage race of the season. It's the Giro Rosa. Annemiek van Vleuten will return to defend her title, and almost all of the world's best riders will be there. Once again, we do have coverage on Race Pass everywhere except for Australia, New Zealand and Italy. The race though is not produced live, but we've got extended highlights that will be up every day just as soon as we can get them after the stage. And before it even starts, you'll be able to catch our big GCN preview about the race. That's coming tomorrow with Manon and Marty, so keep your eyes out for that. Many of the riders who will be competing at that race are currently at the catchily titled Tour Cycliste Féminin International de l'Ardèche. So 4 of the 7 stages have been completed as I record this. Now unfortunately we don't have any footage from that race, but I can tell you that the 3rd stage went to newly crowned French champion Audrey Cordon-Ragot of Trek Segafredo. Yesterday's stage was won by Kristin Faulkner of Team Tibco Silicon Valley Bank, but the first 2 stages were both won by the constantly improving Mavi Garcia of Ale Ljubljana. She now holds an 8-second lead in the GC going into stage 5. Meanwhile, Van Aert is not the only cyclocross star winning races on the road, as Tom Pidcock of Trinity Racing dominated the Baby Giro. Over the course of the 8 stages that make up that race for young riders, Pidcock won 3 of them, including the final stage, which finished up the Mortirolo. Now sticking with Italy, the World Championships will be taking place there this year, and specifically in Imola. With Switzerland unable to host it this year due to COVID restrictions, the UCI was forced to find an alternative venue, so Imola it is. And I have to say, I was slightly concerned about a World Championships taking place on a motor racing circuit, but the good news for me, and for you I guess as well, is that it's not confined to that circuit, and it looks like it'll be a very tough race indeed. The men's has 5,000 metres of climbing, whilst the women's will have close to 3,000 metres. Perfect for Van Vleuten to defend her crown. Not so good for Mads Pedersen, it's got to be said. Unfortunately, a few riders will be completely unable to defend their titles because the event is now just for the elites. So nothing for the juniors or under-23s, which is a massive shame because their season's been far more affected than it has for the pros. Now, just before we finish, the Tour de Hungary was won by the Hungarian Attila Valter of CCC, and it was a great race for that team in fact. Jakub Mareczko won 3 of the 5 stages in sprints. Second overall was 19-year-old world champion Quinn Simmons of Trek Segafredo. Now, I don't know if top pro cyclists are getting younger and younger these days, or if I'm getting older, but my goodness, that does make me feel old. And finally, the Coppa e Bartali stage race was won by Ineos Grenadiers' Jonathan Narvaez. He won it by just a single second from Andrea Baggioli of Deceuninck Quickstep, who had been leading going into the final day. Right, that is all for this week's show. Just before I go though, Sai will be hosting the World of Cycling show with none other than Sean Kelly as the guest this week, so keep your eye out for that on Wednesday. I'm off for a rest now. I hope we see you tomorrow on The Breakaway. Goodbye for now.